My name is Mary Bell Crane, and I'm 41 years old. For more than half my life, I've been the one who unlocked the same glass doors on 3rd Avenue in Seattle before the sun even cleared the sound. Every morning at 6:47 a.m., my boots hit the pavement, and the key ring on my hip sang like a set of wind chimes only I could hear. The brass key, the first one, was older than the building's polished lobby tiles or the flashy sign the company installed after its second funding round. I'd been carrying it since 2002 when we were just 5 dreamers crowded into a loft above a Po restaurant. Back then, the smell of star anise and fish sauce clung to the hallways, and no one had a budget for office chairs that didn't wobble. I wasn't even supposed to stay more than a year. I was 20, eager, and good with my hands. The founder asked if I could help out until things stabilized. They never did. Not really, but I stayed. That key fit into the lock with a stiff click, the kind that tells you 1,000 mornings have already worn the tumblers thin. When I turned it, the building seemed to sigh awake. Lights hummed, vents exhaled, servers blinked their green eyes. I told myself I was the spine of this place, the one part that couldn't be swapped out. It wasn't pride so much as survival if I didn't believe my work mattered. Who else would on that Tuesday morning? The city was still fogged in and quiet. My reflection in the glass looked tired but steady, hair pulled back, tool bag slung over my shoulder. I pressed the brass key into the lock and remembered the first day I held it. The founder had said, "This makes you family." I believed him. For 21 years. I believed him. I didn't know then that the same key I treasured like a promise would one day cut deeper than any betrayal. I only knew the building would need me, like always. So I stepped inside, brushed the fog from my jacket, and went to work. The break room smelled sour before I even set down my bag. Someone had left a kombucha bottle too long, and the smart fridge had done what it always did, locked up, sealed itself like a vault. Then burst. I pulled off my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, and started scraping fermented tea from the shelves with a rag. It wasn't in my job description, but it never was. By 7 o'clock, I was on my knees in the server room, listening to the whine of a cooling unit fighting against the dampness of another Seattle morning. I'd patched those units more times than I could count through power surges, ice storms, even a pipe burst that nearly drowned our servers back in 2010. I still remember the panic that night, the CTO standing helpless while I waded ankle-deep in freezing water, flashlight between my teeth, wrench in my hand, no photo, no plaque, no bonus. Just a half-eaten protein bar someone tossed my way with a muttered, "You're a lifesaver." Upstairs. The executives were already posting on LinkedIn about innovation and disruption, their chairs costing more than my pickup truck. Down here, I knew every groan of the pipes, every breaker that hummed before a storm, every thermostat that threw tantrums when humidity rose above 70%. They talked about scaling. I was the one keeping the bones from breaking under their weight. Sometimes I felt like a ghost no one could name, called only when a printer jammed or a conference room went dark before a pitch. That was when I heard my father's voice, the loudest his gravelly tone from decades ago, handing me his old red Craftsman toolbox. "You do the work right. Or you don't do it at all." The metal case still rode in the back of my truck, dented but solid, wrenches arranged exactly as he left them. I carried his rule like scripture, even when no one noticed. Especially when no one noticed. I believed that if I kept showing up, if I kept doing the work right, loyalty would mean something in return. That morning, with tea stains on my hands and server fans roaring in my ears, I still believed it. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite that dropped into my day like a stone into Water Conference Room B restructuring discussion. No details, no warning, just the bland smile of HR stamped on my schedule. I walked in the next morning wearing my work shirt with the company logo frayed at the collar and the same boots that had carried me through storms and server floods. Inside sat Tyler, the new HR director, young enough to be my kid, his Patagonia vest zipped to the chin. Beside him was a man I didn't recognize, slick hair, expensive suit, folder resting under his hand like it held state secrets. "Thanks for coming in." "Maribel," Tyler said with a guidance counselor smile. "We're restructuring operations." I didn't answer. I'd seen this playbook before. The lawyer slid the folder across the table. I opened it to find a severance agreement, 3 months' pay, a non-disclosure clause, and my health coverage cut off at the end of the quarter. My name at the top read Maribel Crane, 21 years. And they couldn't even spell it right. "We'll need your badge and all company keys today," the lawyer added, his voice flat as concrete. I sat still for a long moment. The hum of the overhead light buzzed in my ears. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy steel ring I'd carried since 2004. 14 keys, each tagged in my handwriting. I set them down on the table, one by one, until the ring landed with a solid clink. I looked Tyler in the eye. "Are you sure you want these?" He blinked, confused, but forced his corporate smile back into place. "It's just procedure, nothing personal." "Of course," I said, sliding the severance packet closed. My hands were steady, but inside, something cracked wide open. I buttoned my shirt, lifted my bag, and left the room before the silence could turn into something else. The sun outside was blinding, sharp on my face. For the first time in 21 years, I walked out of that building without looking back. The severance packet lay unopened on my kitchen counter that night, its edges curling from the damp air drifting in off Elliott Bay. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Instead, I opened a drawer where I kept things that still mattered: old bills, photographs, and a folder worn soft from 2 decades of being pulled out and put back. It carried me to 2002, the year I first stepped into this city with nothing but a toolkit and too much faith. The company wasn't a company then. Not really. Just 5 20-somethings coding on folding tables above a FIO shop on Yesler Way. Their laptops overheated, the lights flickered, and the landlord had had enough. They needed a new space downtown, but no one would sign a lease with a startup that couldn't prove it would survive 6 months. I still see Randy Foster, the founder, across from me at a greasy diner booth on First Avenue. He was desperate, voice cracking as he said, "Maribel, if you don't help us, we'll be working out of my garage by next week. My wife will kill me." He slid the paperwork across the table with trembling hands. The lease was modest by today's standards, 10 pages. A space no bigger than a grocery store, but to us, it was a palace. They didn't qualify. I did. I was 20, barely old enough to rent a car, but I had clean credit and a stubborn streak. I signed my name on the dotted line, thinking it would buy them a year, maybe 2, until they could take it over. Randy swore it was temporary, promised he'd transfer everything once the company stabilized. But years blurred. Renewals came and went. Somewhere along the way, everyone forgot, or maybe they never wanted to remember. Each amendment still carried my name, in ink darkened with age, tucked into that folder now sitting under my hand. 21 years later, the company that had just fired me didn't even realize who their landlord was on paper. I stared at my signature, steady and young, and felt the first ember of something I hadn't allowed myself in years: power. The next morning, the city was wrapped in a thin veil of rain, the kind that left streets glistening like fresh oil. I sat in my garage with the overhead light buzzing faintly, the smell of sawdust and WD-40 clinging to the air. Against the back wall sat my father's old Craftsman toolbox, red paint chipped, corners dented, handles worn smooth from his hands, and now mine. I pulled it closer, the metal groaning on concrete. Inside, socket wrenches lay in neat rows exactly as he'd left them decades ago. Each one a reminder of his rule: do the work right, or don't do it at all. Beneath the tray, under a stack of receipts and faded schematics, was the folder? The same one I'd carried since 2002, edges coffee-stained, stuffed with amendments and notes scrawled in my handwriting. I laid the papers across the workbench, smoothing the creases with the flat of my palm. Page after page bore my signature, steady and sure, renewing the lease year after year. I had stopped thinking about it long ago routine, like paying the light bill, but that morning I read every line as if for the first time. Section 9B sat buried on page 12. Renewal of lease term shall require written notice from lessee no later than 30 days prior to expiration. I checked the last renewal date. My breath caught. August 1st. Today was August 3rd. I flipped back through my email archives, phone records, even the mailbox key hanging near the door. Nothing. No notice sent. No form filed. No letter slipped under my door. They hadn't renewed. Not this time. The contract was clear failure to renew meant automatic conversion to month-to-month tenancy, terminable at will by either party with 30 days' notice. The building where I had just been fired, where I'd given 21 years of my life, was now held together by a piece of paper with my name on it and their negligence stamped across it in silence. I leaned back on the stool, rain ticking against the garage roof. My father's toolbox open beside me. In the quiet hum of that moment, the ember inside me flared into a steady flame. I didn't rush. The power wasn't in what I said, but in what I chose not to. 2 days after finding the clause, I walked into the marble-floored office of the property manager, Thomas Weber. His desk was littered with neat stacks of highlighted documents, the smell of fresh toner rising from his printer. He looked up, startled to see me. Maribel Crane. I introduced myself, setting the folder on his desk. I'd like to review the lease for Suite 201-221. He adjusted his glasses, flipping through the pages I laid out, when he reached the last renewal. His eyebrows lifted. They missed the deadline. I nodded. Which means month-to-month tenancy. I'm exercising my right to terminate. The words hung in the air. Thomas leaned back, his chair creaking. He didn't argue, he just understood the weight of what I carried. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table across from Leo Bishop, my neighbor who had once been the kid mowing lawns down the block and was now a real estate attorney with a nervous energy that never left him. His Bluetooth headset blinked like a lighthouse as he tapped his pen against the table. "You realize what you're holding here," he said, scanning the termination draft he'd drawn up. "They fired you without even checking who was on the lease. This is ironclad." We filed the notice electronically that night, attaching scanned copies of every amendment, every signature, every clause. It felt less like revenge and more like finally standing upright after 2 decades of carrying weight in silence. But I didn't stop there. Months earlier, at a farmer's market, I'd met a woman named Morgan Callahan, founder of Bloom Haven Wellness. She'd asked casually if I knew of any open downtown space her investors were pushing hard, desperate for a flagship. I'd laughed it off then. Now I called her. By the end of the week, Bloomhaven had wired a deposit for triple the rent the tech company was paying. Their crews were ready to move the second I gave the word, for the first time. The balance had shifted. I wasn't the invisible hand anymore. I was the one holding the cards. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as I was sorting through medical bills for my mother. Her arthritis treatments weren't covered by her insurance anymore, and the envelopes piled higher each month. I rubbed my eyes, weary, when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen since holiday parties where he'd barely remembered mine. Philip Ashford. CEO, Maribel, he began. Voice strained but coated in that same corporate varnish. Let's be reasonable. He launched straight into number 6 figures wired immediately, continued health coverage for a year, and a promise of consulting opportunities down the line. All I had to do was sign an NDA and file a simple amendment to clear up the paperwork issue. I sat in silence, the hum of my fridge filling the room. That kind of money could clear my mother's bills, even pay off my own mortgage faster. For a moment, my throat tightened. 21 years of loyalty had left me with little more than calloused hands and steady debt. Here was a chance to make it all disappear. Philip must have sensed my pause. You've been invaluable. Maribel. We should have recognized that sooner. Let's not let one oversight ruin everything. I closed my eyes and saw the severance folder again. My name spelled wrong across the top like a final insult. Maribel. 21 years and they hadn't cared enough to get the letters right. They hadn't cared when I fixed their servers in the dark, or when I kept the heat running during storms, or when I signed the lease that kept them afloat. I opened my eyes. Steady now. No. Philip, I said, you made your choice when you fired me. I'm making mine now. The silence on the line stretched until it broke with a sharp click. I set the phone down on the table, the weight of temptation lifting off my chest. The bills were still there, my doubts still whispering, but for the first time in years, my dignity felt heavier than any debt. Monday morning broke sharp and clear, the kind of Seattle day when the sky looks scrubbed clean. By 8 o'clock, the sheriff's deputy was already inside the lobby, clipboard under one arm, fluorescent paper in hand. I lingered across the street with a coffee, watching through the glass. His boots echoed as he climbed the stairs to the executive floor. A minute later, the orange notice was zip-tied to the CEO's glass door, the bold black letters glaring against the polished transparency, notice to vacate, 72 hours. From where I stood, I could see the ripple move through the office. A receptionist froze. Latte half raised, someone from marketing whispered too loudly, her voice cracking. Phones lit up across desks like a string of alarms. Then came the panic. Investors calling, managers stumbling out of conference rooms with headsets pressed tight, voices rising. The building didn't hum with the steady rhythm of servers and machines anymore. It quaked with fear. I crossed the street slowly, the weight of my boots grounding me. No one noticed me slip inside. Not at first. Everyone's eyes were locked on that strip of orange plastic fluttering on the CEO's door. I walked past rows of cubicles where I'd once fixed flickering lights, past the break room fridge I'd once scraped clean, and no one turned their head. And that was fine for 2 decades. I had been invisible in this place, called only when wires sparked or pipes groaned. Today, I moved through their panic unseen, and for the first time, I wanted it that way. As I reached the lobby again, I caught a glimpse of Philip Ashford himself, storming down the hallway, his tie askew, his face pale. He tore the notice from the door and read it twice, lips moving without sound. His hands shook. I slipped out the glass doors into the sunlight, blending with the crowd on 3rd Avenue. Behind me, the building roared with confusion. Ahead of me, the street felt quiet, almost steady. For the first time, I wasn't the one holding things together. I was the one letting go. The call came just after dark, when the city outside my window had quieted to the low hum of passing buses. My phone buzzed across the counter, the screen glowing with a name I knew all too well. Philip Ashford, for a moment. I let it ring. On the 4th chime, I picked up, his voice cracked on the first word. Maribel, you can't do this. I poured myself a glass of water, holding the phone to my ear with the same calm I once brought to flooded server rooms. I already did. Philip, this will destroy us, he pressed, desperation pushing past his polished tone. The board, the press, our investors. You fired the one who held the keys, I said simply. My words hung there, solid, immovable. The line went silent except for his ragged breathing when he finally spoke again. The bluster was gone. Please, there has to be a way. There was. I replied. It was 21 years long. Then I ended the call. By Friday, the move had begun. From the street, I watched Herman Miller chairs, each one worth more than the truck they were loading them into, being shoved into dented U-Hauls. Cardboard boxes spilled printer paper onto the sidewalk. A junior executive in a wrinkled suit argued with the driver about straps and schedules, his voice breaking as if the whole building were collapsing around him. I didn't linger. I only walked past once more. Steady, anonymous in the flow of pedestrians. Through the glass doors, I saw the first crew from Bloomhaven Wellness unrolling tape measures, marking the walls where meditation pods and air purification systems would soon replace whiteboards and server racks. The air smelled different already, not of panic or sweat, but of beginnings. For them, for me. I adjusted the strap of my bag across my shoulder and kept walking. Each step lighter than the last. The building I had carried for 2 decades was no longer mine to hold. It was theirs to lose, and someone else's to build anew. 3 months later. My days no longer began in a crawl space or ended with an inbox full of neglected work orders. Instead, I set my own schedule. By the second week, I was consulting for 2 office towers downtown. By the end of the month, 4. The numbers on my invoices doubled what I'd earned before. And for once, I chose who I worked with. If I didn't like the way a client treated their staff, I walked away. The freedom was strange at first. I'd spent more than half my life tethered to one address, one set of keys, one identity. Now I drove across Seattle with the radio on, windows rolled down, no badge clipped to my shirt. When I parked in front of a new building, I carried my father's toolbox with me like always, but this time it felt less like armor and more like inheritance. The bills for my mother's treatments didn't frighten me anymore. I wrote the checks with steady hands. She teased me one evening as I fixed a squeaky hinge on her porch door. "You finally learned your worth." Hee-ha, about time. I smiled, not arguing, because she was right. That night, back in my garage, I looked at the wall where I kept my small collection of things that mattered, my father's photograph in black and white, my first paycheck from 1981 tucked into a frame. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the original brass key from 2002, the one that had opened every door for 21 years. I mounted a simple brass hook and hung the key there, steady and shining under the garage light. It wasn't a relic of loss. It was proof of everything I had built, carried, and finally reclaimed. The city outside buzzed with its usual chaos, but I stood there a long time in the quiet, the key glinting against the wall. It was no longer a symbol of servitude. It was mine.